Welcome back to the World Lens podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Evans, Senior Manager of Digital Marketing at WTCI. And today I'm joined by my co-host, WTCI Board Member and President of McIndoe Risk Advisory, Bruce McIndoe. How are you, Bruce?
we don't want any advisories. Let's stay well in climate.
It's definitely a tongue twister for me right now.
That's all right.
But yeah, you just mentioned today we are discussing something that you've demonstrated a deep understanding of, which is climate change. So today is November 11th, and COP30, the UN's largest climate conference, began yesterday in Brazil. So the geopolitical landscape has undergone some significant shifts since the last COP meeting. So do you think we should temper our expectations about what this conference will actually produce?
I think it's absolutely fair to temper our expectations. There's no question the geopolitical landscape is extremely challenging this year. We have at the conference now, the three largest, emitters, the United States, China, and India, did not send representatives at the executive level, and so though it sends a very powerful signal about the priorities of the three countries, right? Now they are all different, right? So for in the US case, President Trump has chosen not to send any senior administration officials, right? And has publicly dismissed climate change as some kind of hoax or fake. So, that inevitably, weakens the credibility of a global effort there and a sense of collective momentum. So, it's definitely going to hamstring what's going on. But COP30 remains incredibly important. Brazil is hosting this at a moment when the global South is, asserting a stronger voice on climate finance, right? Trying to get money for, adaptation and mitigation, and to deal with the real effects of climate change. So they're there, and they're going to have obviously a stronger voice if the major powers are less, aren't at the table. So even if we don't see, major new commitments or, progress could come in, but, like I said, renewed dialogue and funding mechanisms and technology transfer and all the other things that they're going to talk about. So I'm going to say expectations should be modest, but, the stakes are way too high for disengagement to be an option. So let's give them all the hope we can.
Yeah. So there was this original goal of limiting the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Is that even attainable anymore?
Realistically, no. Next question. No. Of course, the 1.5 C at the time was, what the scientists and our models and everything said, we really need to get to, if we don't want to have to deal with the effects of climate change in a big way. And so I would say it's become more of a target that it's a moral and political target than a physical outcome, right? But we're already at about 1.3 centigrade, right, from pre-industrial levels. And so the current trajectories, and this sickens me, puts us more around 2.5 degrees by the end of the century, right? 75 years. So that is a very troublesome number. And, the problem that, and this is around my reasons for hope, right? The problem isn't the science. We have the technology. We have either in production solar and nuclear and all the things that we have today that we could scale up, but we have new technologies that are actually in demonstratable, looking for funding that could further, carbon sequestration, as far as capturing carbon and all those things. So it's not a problem with science. It's the politics. It's actually getting things implemented and the U.S. and China have both been absent, not only
Okay.
here, but in this. China's been knocking it out of the park as far as manufacturing and production of renewable energy. But anyway, so with it's the coordinated leadership is missing, and it makes it really hard. So while that 1.5 goal matters, it hopefully reminds us what's at stake, and we'll try to see what's next and what comes out of COP30. So,
Yeah. So you've said that we're trending to be at 2.5 by the end of the century, right?
mm-hmm.
Is there any way to kind of, are there any ways to like reduce that number? Are there any things that we can do? Like, what are the trade offs that will require us to maybe drop that number down?
um, so yeah, I guess yes. So 1.5 is no longer achievable in my
Mm-hmm.
estimation, right? So that I think it's the kind of thing that you can't just say, oh, we're going to just live with 2.5 and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
That's reckless, right? So if you
Very.
move the threshold, and I hope that they do this, at the conference, or at least start getting toward it. But let's say 2 degrees centigrade, right?
Mm-hmm.
That might not sound like much, and it's not, but every tenth of a degree, right, brings steeper impacts, stronger
Right.
storms, deeper droughts, higher
Right.
costs for adaptation and resilience. So keeping that in front and center, and creating this sense of pain that we're going to face for every tenth of a degree, I think makes a lot of sense. So using that 2 degree number, if they move that target, then hopefully it'll drive more demand for faster investment and protecting coastlines and all the things that we need to do. So
Mm-hmm.
the trade-off is that adaptation, meaning all the things that we're going to do in having to live with climate
Mm-hmm.
change, right, versus mitigation, which is avoiding climate change.
Right.
So adaptation is going to become more important, year over year
Mm-hmm.
and decade over decade. So, that's it's not a surrender, but it's realism that, and it's
Yes.
going to come at higher human and economic cost.
Mm.
Hmm.
So Europe, who's traditionally a climate leader, they seem to be kind of scaling back on their commitments towards climate change. Does this signal any type of shifts that would come at COP30?
Yes. Two things. One is, I would say, Europe is there in force, so they're going to have a strong voice, but they're facing political and economic pushback at home, right? So
Mm-hmm.
energy prices, inflation, the rise of populist parties, have all made this climate policy harder to sell domestically in all of the countries, EU countries, and the UK.
Right.
But the and we've seen delays to the European Green Deal, and softening some of their targets. So it definitely doesn't mean Europe's not abandoning leadership, but it's
Mm-hmm.
clearly entering a more defensive posture.
Gotcha.
And the financial part of this, if you're a nation state, spending less on climate change actually increases GDP, right? So right there is a very hard sell to
Yeah.
to your constituents. So I hope that protecting competitiveness and the strength of Europe in this area, that it will translate into maybe lower ambition but stronger focus.
Okay.
We'll see. Yeah.
So, like you just said, Europe is kind of on the defensive side now, and we just spoke about how the US and Trump's administration feels about climate change.
Yeah.
Who would you say is driving climate change forward on the world stage these days?
Um, Yeah, I guess the short answer is it's a mix of actors, and we're going to see that play out in COP30. And
Mm-hmm.
this is a coalition of what we would call kind of middle powers, right? Not the biggest and not the littlest, but the nation states that are kind of in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Even subnational governments, private capital, and countries of, as I mentioned, before, the countries of the global South are turning up the volume. And
Mm-hmm.
but the EU still moves policy and finance, when it can. So it's going to have a voice there. And China, Brazil, and other major developing economies, I would say, are pretty much central to the manufacturing and achieving the mitigation. So they'll be there. So all of that, along with city and state governments and major corporations and national multilateral development banks, they're all
Mm-hmm.
there. So it's now, instead of having like a single focal leadership
Mm-hmm.
or like a G20 or a G7 type leadership council, since
Right.
that's not there, all of these just different actors now have to come and sort this out. It makes it harder.
Yeah. So the Trump administration has threatened tariffs, sanctions, visa revocations, all against countries who support this international shipping pollution fee. Can we expect to see this like continued resistance to the international climate agreements?
Let's see. Yes on tariffs and sanctions,
Mm-hmm.
and yes on resistance. That seems to be the major lever slash hammer that
Mm-hmm.
the U.S. has been using. But the Trump administration, since literally day one, has shown it will use economic and diplomatic pressure to block measures that it sees,
Yeah.
quote unquote, harming U.S. interests, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and that includes threats like this around the international shipping levy. So, I think we can absolutely expect continued aggressive resistance to anything that imposes costs on U.S.
Mm-hmm.
industry and key trading partners. So, I would say, that resistance, I guess, stymie specific measures like this shipping
Mm-hmm.
fee thing, but it doesn't stop all multilateral progress. So, so yes, things will pop up like this and it'll get a hard hit, but others will slide along and won't get the attention of the administration. So we'll see, but that's what's happening here.
Yeah, well, they already said that they'll withdraw from the Paris Agreement again. Like you mentioned, this America First
Mm-hmm.
energy policy that like prioritizes fossil fuel production over these climate commitments.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you
Drill,
think
baby,
that
drill.
do you think that COP30 is better off without US in the room to kind of disrupt these things?
Um, so practically speaking, U.S. federal, right, national
Yeah.
leadership is absolutely constrained. Like you said, the administration has signaled withdrawal and chose not to send any senior officials to
Yeah.
COP30, right? I mean, China sent their deputy premier, right? India has leadership there as well. But so that limits Washington's ability to shape outcomes or even offer
Hmm.
finance, right? So anyway, that said, U.S. states are there. For example, the governor of
Gavin Newsom.
California, right? Gavin
Yeah.
Newsom is there pitching California as a reliable partner to helping
Hmm.
solve and mitigate climate change. And we can't forget, and you have to take these things in context. California, if it was a nation, would be the fourth largest GDP on the planet. Number four.
Mm.
Okay. So California being there and making those statements, they're very meaningful, right? I
Hmm.
think it's 4 trillion or something is their GDP. But anyway, so so there are these other actors that are there on, that are representing the U.S. interest to some degree, right? Even though our administration leadership is not there. So we will have a voice, and a strong one, for example, with California. But it really, the absence reduces our leverage in moving things along. Disengagement is troublesome.
Yeah, that's a good way for it.
Yeah.
So many of the smaller nations, like particularly the ones like in the Pacific and Caribbean, as well as some of the developing countries in the sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, they face like the greatest climate impacts. They have the rising seas, extreme weather, agricultural disruption. But these are the same countries that depend on the US for aid, trade relationships, and security. How do they navigate this situation when they kind of still are economically and strategically tied to us?
Sure. Just delicately, maybe say. Yeah, in looking at what these, and it's always the poorest and the ones that are geographically disadvantaged, right? A small island that might pay 15 meters above sea level, right? But anyway, so these countries are pursuing is what we would call a 3-track strategy to kind of address all of these challenges. So the first thing that they're doing, we would say kind of this, they're banding together, right? And this is under the kind of the diplomatic umbrella, right? To amplify their voice, right? And address, loss damage demands and, getting financing and that kind of stuff. So that's number one. This kind of like we can't do it as little pieces, but if we come together as a whole, we have a stronger voice. So that's one. And then the other thing that they're doing as part of these alliance is diversifying their partners for finance and trade, right? And going after regional blocks, within China and EU and even the multilateral banks like the World Bank and others. So again, diversification, so they're not relying heavily on any one pillar, right? And then the final one, which is the hardest one, but is with all of that pressing continuously for concrete adaptation funding. And adaptation is a nice word for saying spending a lot of money on things that aren't mitigating, but are mitigating the effects of climate change that is going to happen. Rising sea levels, strong. Look what happened in Jamaica. Look what happened in the Philippines. Look what just massive destruction. Those kinds of things. So where's that funding going to come from? Where's the technology transfer to be able to harden buildings and make them less susceptible to severe weather damage? So really, those are the three things, banding together, diversification, and pressing for real investment so that they can survive.
So you mentioned how like all the sea rising and things like that actually affect insurance companies. I've seen like a lot of these insurance companies pull out of these high risk markets like Florida and California, and the premiums are skyrocketing. So
everywhere.
How is how is climate change basically like reshaping the real estate markets, and what does that mean for businesses who are trying to budget for these like escalated climate related costs?
Yeah, it's not only reshaping the real estate markets, it's reshaping the industry, right? So I was at a risk and insurance conference earlier in the year, and there was a session that I went to that will the property and casualty market break the insurance industry? Right. Think about in the beginning of the year with the fires and all that we had and the billions and billions of dollars of destruction and claims. Right. And so when you see these accumulating, Is insurance even going to work, right? And anyway, so because of that, we've seen the insurance pullbacks, like you said, where one, they do steep premium hikes, right? And so all of that is altering housing markets in the U.S. and around the world. Frankly, it's not just the U.S. So transactions fall through, like in Florida when buyers can't get coverage, right? So they can't get a mortgage, right? And some markets, again in the U.S., will say, okay, it's like almost like the flood program. It's like, okay, if the private sector is not going to do it, then the state's going to step in, right, as kind of insurer of last resort. And what happens over time is you get property value divergence, right, where you get these housing values that decline in risky areas, right? And then you might see them stabilize or even increase in where wealthy buyers, offset that risk. So it's again, the rich prevail and the poor suffer. And there's a lot of housing stock in the U.S. and I'm sure around the world that is not insured at all, right? And so anyway, but let's bring this back to business, because I think this is important, and it came out in that presentation. And for businesses, this raises real balance sheet and operational questions that need to seep into the consciousness of boards and leadership, right?
Yeah.
They're going to see higher operating costs, more capital tied to reserves to cover shortfalls and losses. And they need to be able to model climate risk into their asset valuations as well as contingency planning. And businesses, need to expect a much higher cost of capital and more conservative risk assessments from insurers and others, right? So, I would say it's already in the consciousness of many large companies. It is not in medium to small companies, and they're the ones that are less capable of taking the shock. So
they need to wake up. Be prepared. So Bill Gates recently said that we should, you mentioned this earlier, shift from stopping climate change to kind of helping the world's poorest countries adapt to it. Do you think that this is like more of a philosophical shift for climate advocates, since, you're a realist and you were saying how the numbers aren't looking too great?
Unfortunately, I've seen all the noise around Bill Gates' memo, and I would say it was absolutely misinterpreted. And I think, at least what I've seen in the last days, people softening this a little bit more. I would say Gates' call reflects what I'll call a more pragmatic thread in the debate, right? And he basically saying, look, I want to emphasize human welfare, right? And where suffering is, and with that adaptation, because they're already suffering, and any technologies that reduce that suffering. That's all he's trying to say. He's saying, I'm not saying, don't invest in climate change mitigation and all of that stuff, but we have real human impacts that are happening today, and we need to shift some of our investment in climate change into that realm, right? That's what so he was not advocating a wholesale abandonment of mitigation, among all the players, right? So, many argue, and this was part of the debate and some of the op-eds and stuff, that adaptation and mitigation are complementary, right? And it's like, yeah, they are, right? Because if I can't mitigate, then I need to adapt to minimize loss. Sure. But all he's saying is we got to balance the scale differently than we are right now. And so I value that he has created this debate, and hopefully it will, impact some shift, because there's a lot of suffering right now around the world due to climate change that exists today.
So. Then you have on the flip side people who would argue that despite how devastating it is, it's creating market opportunities. There's the demand for resilience infrastructure, low
Mhm.
carbon technologies, alternative supply chain solutions, because those are being disrupted. Are we seeing that, this capital flow towards these opportunities, or is it like mostly talk?
There's an old adage: where there's pain, there is gain.
Mm,
Okay, so capital is flowing. I guess, energy transition investment, hit record levels in the recent years.
mm-hmm,
Climate tech still attracts, meaningful venture capital and corporate investment. No question, the flows are uneven,
mm-hmm,
which is part of this lack of kind of leadership and coherent governance of what we're dealing with. But big dollars funnel to, the scalable clean energy, batteries, all that kind of stuff. Well,
mm-hmm,
adaptation and resilience gets pennies, right? Which is again back to what Gates was pushing on, right?
right.
So, and, investors are, more selective. They want stuff that's proven now,
Mm-hmm,
versus, blue sky stuff. But we still need, more public finance and guarantees from state actors to unlock larger private capital for adaptation versus
mm-hmm.
mitigation, and that's the debate.
So in our last episode, we talked about AI's explosive
Oh
growth
no,
and
not
changes in the
AI.
space. But with these data centers consuming massive amounts of
uh,
power, are the goals just ridiculously unachievable at this point?
so data centers being driven by AI and AI growth
Mm-hmm,
definitely raises the bar. There's no question. I see every day in my email, because I'm very involved in the energy production,
mm-hmm,
nuclear and otherwise, that they're just seeing the demand, going off the charts, right? So,
mm-hmm.
um, and unfortunately, when you look at the charts, data center electricity consumption is rising fast, right?
Yeah.
And all of the utilities are saying that it's going to represent a larger and larger share of demand, year over year.
Mm-hmm,
But the challenge is manageable if the growth is paired with efficiency, grid decarbonization, meaning more solar
mm-hmm.
and renewable, and smart siting, they call it, right? Where am I locating these data centers? I don't want to stick them out in some rural area where it's easy to get permitted, but I don't have the infrastructure to feed power to it, right?
Right.
And then so if I can cite these things where I've got low carbon grids, meaning renewable energy, nuclear energy. Some of them are putting small nuclear reactors, right? Or restarting nuclear generation, but also implementing heat reuse and recycling. When they're generating all of this heat, if you can capture that heat and redirect it into public buildings and office buildings and those kinds of things, then you won't be drawing power to heat those buildings. The servers will.
Right.
So I guess the short of this, and this is classic, right? So unchecked growth without policy or efficiency improvements will make mitigation way harder. And
Yeah.
again, this concept of coordination and planning and investment needs to be more holistically managed rather than driven by capital demands. So that's the
Mm-hmm.
concern that the community has.
So I'm noticing more and more that, TV shows and movies are,
Oh
entering
yeah.
the climate conversation. Apple TV, they have this show, it's Extrapolation, that basically
Mhm.
depicts an interconnected climate future across decades. Then you also have like movies like Day After Tomorrow and Snowpiercer that also show like the devastating effects of climate change. Do you think pop culture can influence the public where policy and science haven't?
Absolutely. I mean, I've two of these I've watched, and it's very moving, right? You know,
Mm-hmm.
the films
It
and
is.
TV series like this make abstract, you know, risks, right, tangible.
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely, it shapes the public narratives and can shift public awareness, and you know, and I guess more importantly, it creates space, political space for
Mm-hmm.
action. So it is awesome that Hollywood is out there doing this, because
Yeah.
it really can shape minds, and they can see like what could this future look like. I don't want that future. How do we,
Mm-hmm.
you know, fix it, right? So it doesn't replace policy or science, but it can change what, you know, voters care about, and
Yeah.
you know, spur grassroots pressure and normalize conversations, because people can relate. Remember what we saw in the, you know, day after tomorrow, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, tsunami waves and all that stuff, you know. So it is really you know, using media to humanize impacts definitely can
Mm-hmm.
motivate civic engagement. I love it. I think it's incredibly important.
I agree. All right. So first crystal ball of season 3. You ready?
Mhm.
So in the early 2020s, we showed like some genuine climate progress. But given
Mhm.
everything that we just discussed, is the momentum lost? Or is this, a temporary setback rather than a permanent reversal?
Okay. It's definitely a setback, no
Mm-hmm.
question. It's not a guaranteed permanent reversal, so
That's
definitely
good.
not. You know, policies and markets still favor clean tech, and you know, definitely more than they did a decade ago.
Mm-hmm.
There are political headwinds, and there's shortfalls in finance, and all the things that we talked about, but I would say at this point, you know, momentum depends now on whether private capital, non-state actors, and some committed governments can scale implementation fast enough, right, to
Mm.
compensate for major nation state like the U.S. Backsliding, right? So
Yeah.
I guess, you know, I always like to finish, because, you know, they always call me Dr. Doom, right, when I give my presentations. So I always finish with reasons for hope.
Yes.
And I would definitely do that here. I'm going to call it a reversible setback, and that may be,
Okay. I like
you
it.
know, you know, the clock is definitely getting shorter.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I'm saying it's reversible, because what I see in practical applications today, what I see that actually are demonstratable in labs
Mm-hmm.
around, you know, carbon capture, batteries, energy production, just across the board, it's there. You know,
Mm-hmm.
back to my point, it's not science, it's political will and it's investment, that we can actually reverse this setback if we put our collective minds and treasure. And that would be my, you know, kind of optimistic reasons for hope, is we can do it.
Yeah. I like that. You're not Dr. Doom. Well, thank you, Bruce, so much for engaging in this very timely and important conversation. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode of The World Lens. To learn more about our events, insights, and member news, visit WTCI.org. And you can also connect with us on our social media channels at WTC Institute. Until next time.